So today we're going to be reviewing this mobile mechanic on YouTube. He's called Mobile Mechanic Chain IX. I'm not sure how he wants that pronounced, but this is a video where he's testing a starter, and it's how to test a starter without having to touch the starter itself. And he specifically describes in his description, it seems there is 1.6 million people who don't know how to watch a video and pay attention. This video is stated that it's only to tell you if your starter is bad, basically. He's not giving you any other information. What he's doing is initially showing you what he does to just do a quick test to see if the starter is good or not, which is totally fine. We're going to review the video and see if there's any things he could do to improve what advice he's giving to people.
Alright, in this video,
Okay.
I'm going to show you how to test a starter without actually having to access it or get to it. A lot of vehicles, starters are hard to get to, but if you're having a starting problem, it'd be nice to know, right off the bat whether that starter works. Now this is something that you would do after you've already checked to make sure that your battery terminals are tight and clean. And check your battery, make sure you have voltage and everything like that. Check to make sure the vehicle's in park and that your clutch switch
Is the vehicle he's working on is a GM. Okay, so GMs are very notorious, especially the 90s to 2000 models. That seems to be what he's working on here, probably. From the looks of it, it's probably a V6, like a 4.3 of some kind. Maybe. It might even be older, might be earlier 90s, but just from a general picture under the hood, it looks like a V6. Also, so the side post terminals are very notorious for not making good connections. They were made from an engineering standpoint to kind of keep the posts off the top of the battery, just so there's less chance of it arcing. But they were not a great design. They were not great for connection. They always had connection issues. You always have people putting in different hardware, nuts, bolts, whatever they can, besides using the OEM type bolts that you're supposed to use on these batteries. So yeah, he's right in the aspect that you want to check your connections, especially on a GM type vehicle with the side post terminals.
is working if you have a manual. But this would help. Let's say everything looks good, but it's still not starting, and now you're wondering, is it a security issue? Is it a neutral safety switch or something like that? Well, with this technique, you can bypass all that stuff and just check to see if the starter works. And this is applicable to most vehicles. And you start by making sure it is actually in park, or neutral with the e-brake on. You don't, especially with a manual, don't ever do this without making sure the vehicle's in neutral, because you're bypassing all of the safety features.
So what he's essentially saying is he's going to perform this test, and he wants you to verify it's in park or neutral, which is fine. Because you don't want it cranking and trying to move the vehicle, whether it's on the lift or on the ground. It's always good to verify to make sure you're in neutral or park.
Which means when you test that starter to see if it works, it's going to go no matter what. So if you have it in drive, not drive, well, yeah, even drive, you don't want to do it in really. But on a manual, if you have it, let's say in first gear, and you do this, the car could start, and it's definitely at least going to move forward. So make sure it's in neutral. Safety tip.
So he said that it's possible for the vehicle to start. Now, that's not really the case on a fuel injected vehicle unless for some reason the computer's sending out injector pulse. So if the key's off and you don't have any ignition power, it's not going to do anything. It's not going to activate the fuel pump. It's not going to activate the injectors. It's not going to activate the coil and our multiple coils. You'll just crank over.
But you want to start by finding your starter relay. Right here is the relay, and that correlates over to here. And on most relays, you're going to find a diagram on it. So right here's the diagram. I don't know if you can see it. Um, 85 and 86 is, when you turn the key, if all the other safety measures are good to go, um, it's going to apply positive and negative to these right here, and then electromagnetically, it's going to pull this arm down and make a connection between 30 and 87. Okay, so 87 or 30, I don't remember which one it is. One of them is going to be fused, the starter fuse, and one of them is going to be the wire that goes to the starter to make it start. So basically, you're just taking voltage from one side and putting it down to the starter. You can bypass this altogether with a jumper wire. So now that we know, the ones we want to jump are the ones that have it looks like a little door or a lever that's being pulled in.
So typically in all fuses, or all relays, I should say, you do have um, the circuit is between 30 and 87. Pretty much always. That's kind of general knowledge. Um, and he's telling you he's going to do this with the key on. Okay. Well, if you have a multimeter, what I recommend you do is see if it has power with key off first. And that's going to go back to preventing the vehicle from starting or hurting you or doing anything like that. If it has power. So with the key off, you want to test the circuit on 87 and see if it has power with just a typical multimeter. Have one side to ground, test to see if it's hot constantly, if it's a constant hot, because it might be a key on hot only. On this vehicle, I'm pretty sure it always has voltage to it, unless there's like a main relay that gives power or takes away power during key on key off. In this vehicle's case, I'm pretty sure that it's gonna have power with the ignition key off. So if that's the case, I mean, just test it. And if it has power key off, then yeah, you can jump the wire like he's talking about between 30 and 87. Um, let's see what else he has to say.
Then to make a connection on the diagram. So find 87 and 30, and you look on the bottom, and here's 30, and here's 87. They're almost always diagonal, and on most vehicles, it's 30 and 87 on almost all of them. Okay, so you orient this back to where it was. Hang on, there's a truck going by, making all kind of noise. So if you look, 30 is this one, so we're looking at this one here, and then 87's here, so we're looking at these two diagonal. If we make that connection, even if we don't have the key in the vehicle, the starter should actuate. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. All right, so there you have it. So if this wasn't starting, but I was able to do this, you would know that you don't have to crawl under the vehicle and access that starter and start testing stuff down there and checking connections. You can just forget about that and work this way, because you know that's not what it is. It's going to be something, and the fact that this works here, now let's say this didn't work, you'd be wanting to check your starter fuse. Now whether that's labeled individually on here, I'm not really sure. It should be, because that's the only thing that relay does.
Okay, so he's correct. You can jump across like that and it will crank. But with a multimeter, you won't even have to do that if you don't want to. If you want to just check it just to verify, that's fine. But as he said, it's a fused circuit. So between 30 and 87, key off in this case, it has constant power. You can take your multimeter and put one side to the ground terminal on your battery or on your frame or wherever you can put one on. Wherever you can put one on. And what you can do is just see if it has power. So if you have power on the hot side, key off, your fuse is good. You can test that with the multimeter. You don't have to do anything after that in regards to looking for the main power to the fuse circuit itself, because you know the fuse is good because you have power. Because what would happen if the fuse is bad, it won't even give you, it'll give you nothing. Basically, it'll only show ground, and it'll give you no voltage whatsoever because it's not completing the circuit. But if the fuse is bad, you'll have nothing on it. Okay. Now on the other end that goes to the starter, if you wanted to see if the starter was good without jumping the circuit, and you want to verify that the circuit to the starter solenoid is good itself, you can do an ohms test on the ground. So on the other side of that circuit, it's not going to be hot. Okay. It'll be ground. And the reason why it's grounded is because it's grounding through the starter solenoid itself, and it's waiting to see a hot connection or a battery positive to engage the starter solenoid itself on the starter. So what you can do is you can do an ohms test. So you can hook up one side your ground on your battery or your negative side, and then hook the other terminal of your multimeter in an ohms reading test. You can connect it down to the circuit side of the starter solenoid, and you should get an ohms reading. If you get basically almost no resistance, right? No ohms whatsoever. It's a nice connection. You know that wire between the starter solenoid and that fuse box where the starter relay is good.
And this is why I actually tend to do this before I check the starter fuse, because it saves me the time of having to locate the starter fuse. Usually the relay is easier to find, but it could be any one of these engine fuses. It could be a combination fuse for something else too, in which case you'd have to refer to your owner's manual or find a diagram online that says what each fuse does, because they're labeled, like one is labeled cigar, but there's a really good chance that cigar lighter fuse also powers the OBD2 port. So let's say you plug in your scanner and you're not getting power out of it, then first thing you check is a cigar fuse usually. Uh, yeah, I'm not seeing a starter fuse. Maybe you guys are. But either way, we don't need to check it. We know that because that worked, we've got a good fuse and it's putting power down to the starter. Now we can start looking at things like security issues or ignition switch or neutral safety switch or something like that.
I'd say yeah, for the majority, he's totally right in regards to using that as just a quick test. Um, I don't know if I'd necessarily. They make relay jumpers, okay, where it's a fake relay with a switch on top, and you can just flip that switch on and off. Usually they're limited to like 10 to 20 amps usually, but typically, unless you're a diesel, a starter solenoid doesn't usually need that much amperage initially just to get it to crank on. So I see nothing wrong with that. I'd rate this guy a solid 8 out of 10.